All the commission members are here and all staff, so I'm going to call this meeting to order. This is the City of Delaware Historic Preservation Commission meeting of September 27th, 2017. We have a roll call, please.
Mr. Coleman?
Present.
Mr. Nicely?
Excuse me, here.
Ms. Riviera?
Here.
Ms. Van Gundy? Here. Councilman Rohr?
Here.
Vice Chairman Hatton?
Here.
Chairman Coe?
Here. Item 2 on the agenda is approval of the motion summary of the Historic Preservation Commission meeting held on July 26th, 2017, as recorded and transcribed. Have you all had an opportunity to read the motion summary, and do you have any additions or corrections? Hearing none, could I have a motion for approval?
So moved. Second.
I have a motion by Mr. Rohr, second by Mr. Hatton. Any further discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mr. Coleman?
Abstain.
Mr. Nicely?
Yes.
Ms. Riviera?
Yes.
Ms. Van Gundy? Yes. Councilman Rohr?
Yes.
Vice Chairman Hatton?
Yes.
Chairman Coe?
Yes. Item 3 on the agenda, the regular business agenda, is application 2017-2403. This is a request by the City of Delaware for a certificate of appropriateness for the demolition of 20 East William Street, which is Zone B2 in the Central Business District and located in the transitional sub-district of the Downtown Historic District overlay. Do we have a staff report?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, I'll be presenting that to you this evening. I have a little bit of a death by PowerPoint. Obviously, we gave you 70 some odd pages of material. We try to pride ourselves, at least on our applications, with being as complete as we possibly can be for you. Try to set the bar, at least in terms of completeness, even as we realize there might be debate about individual cases. So hopefully you've had an opportunity. I'm just going to summarize it here. We also obviously have City Manager Tom Homan, who may have some remarks on the case as well, and Economic Development Director Sean Hughes. So the property is located on William Street, 20 East William, approximately halfway between Sandusky and Union Street. It is Zone B2 Central Business District, and it does lie in the transitional sub-district of the Historic District overlay. It's the easternmost edge on this side of William Street. Aerial photograph, really, should we need to refer to that as we go along with the case? I think everybody's familiar with the building and the site 2 doors down from this location. So I just want to remind you all, I should note that the site is, the building is not listed individually on the Historic Register or in the Sandusky Street National Historic Register District as well. I should have mentioned that on our previous slide. I want to remind the commission, this was in your packet, about the standards for demolition under your code, section 1190.07. We've been over this relatively recently with, I think probably the last case was the county courthouse case and the Elks building up on North Sandusky. Again, there's basically 2 primary standards. One relates to historic significance of the structure, and the other relates to really relates to reasonable or not having reasonable economic use for our property. Obviously, the second one has a number of orders and conditions and that sort of thing. Tests to go through. I think we tried to outline that in a particular way in your staff report for you as well. Should be noted that both of these conditions do not need to be met for demolition. Only one needs to be met for demolition. So we have this here in case we need to reference it on the screen. This is a previous photograph of the structure. You can see the engineering department sign out front. The city was the most recent occupant of what we've started to call the Sheets building, as we determined it through the history. Looking at the history of the structure, that was the original, that was the individual who originally constructed the building and occupied it actually for about 10 years or so, 10 to 15 years. But we most recently used it for offices for the engineering department from about 2001 to 2015. Just some photographs again, more in case we need to reference them. I think everybody's familiar with the structure, but you have the north elevation or the William Street elevation here with the addition of the porches after the building was constructed, but they themselves are pretty old. A portion of the west elevation of the building. Here we're looking at the west elevation of the building, some of the bricked in previous doorways, windowways, and that sort of thing. You can also see the change in the brick color for where an addition happened at a point in the past. This is the south elevation, the east elevation. Again, you see where the additions were. You see some of the deterioration of the foundation of the structure, although the fire escape added and some of the other changes as noted in your staff report. The lot's narrow, about 52 feet wide and deep, 158 feet deep. It was created really out of a larger lot at a point in time, as most lots are, that became really where the Gazette building is and the engineering building as or Sheets building, as we'll refer to it. The city is requesting demolition of the building in order to put in a parking lot, a public parking lot, for a variety of reasons contained in your staff report. I'll go over some of them here, but this is the conceptual plan. Again, this was contained in your material. It would add approximately 9 to 10 spaces, depending on whether we take up a space with a landscape island and that sort of thing. And the final layout, this is a concept. If demolition moves forward, a final plan for a parking lot will be brought back before you and be in accordance with the historic district standards for parking lot. This is the first plan for it. The other thing you can see is a 24-foot wide drive aisle on safe way access, as opposed to the current condition, which is approximately a 10-foot wide single driveway where one car has to wait for another to go by.
Hey, Dave, before you leave that
Yeah.
slide, rather than save till the end, just a quick question. How many street parking spaces will be lost?
I don't have the number off the top of my head, Commissioner, but as you can see, it says revise on-street parking here, and there would be probably at least a couple of them that the configuration is a little different. So there are a couple that sit out front of the engineering building now to move the driveway over, so there may be enough room to gain one back there. Things we'd have to bring forward, but probably a couple.
Okay.
Yes.
Thanks.
At least, so that you have clear sight distances. But again, to be determined in final form. So here begins a little bit of the death by PowerPoint and some words, but I feel compelled to go over this a little bit with you. First of all, the city doesn't entertain this lightly. And hopefully you got that from the material that we've provided you. Obviously, we're requesting to demolish a building in the historic district, which we never take lightly. And you know that based on our work with you and other applications. So I just want that to say that. We feel as if we've completed really extensive due diligence. Hopefully you feel the same and have been provided a lot of information. And we've learned a lot about the building, frankly, and that's been interesting. And while the building is old and certainly has history, we've documented that. We also suggest in our analysis that the architectural significance test, at any rate, contained in the code, is debatable. We don't have reasonable economic use for the structure as it is, or as it might be restored to a market rate condition. We have a need for additional surface parking, particularly in this area, and for our own, what we're coming to call our City Hall campus, which really now, after several years, many years, includes City Hall, the Gazette building, and this property as well. From our perspective, a public use is a different use than a private use. It's distinguishable from a private use request for all the reasons, again, contained in your staff report, but here in summary format. We have a very limited set of uses for our property as opposed to there could be parks, there could be parking lots. There's just a limited set. That's probably about it, really, for us. Vacant ground, I guess, could be one too. And the city and the county are really the only two entities that can create true public parking lots, as you're well aware. Couple of things as we worked the case and had to really get into this and balance the competing policy objectives that have been passed by our city council. One is our comprehensive plan, of course, which indicates a lot of things. One of which is to try to create a city hall campus here and really be an anchor to downtown. I think we're doing that. Another is to add parking to downtown. Another is to preserve historic downtown. So there are some competing goals and objectives even within our own comprehensive plan potentially. The recent parking study, which I think many of you, if not all of you, participated in, and some of you were on the steering committee, has been brought before council, also says some things. And it says we should really try to look for opportunities to add surface parking in downtown. We're blessed with a lot of success in downtown. A good, high quality problem to have. With that comes the need to have sufficient parking now and looking into the future, hopefully building upon the success. It talks about specifically adding parking to the lot in question here. How you do that, it doesn't talk as much about. It does note that it's difficult to do that without disturbing the historic fabric, just generally in downtown. But that with respect to this lot, we should really work with the adjacent owners to get cross-access easements, if at all possible. And that's really one owner, St. Mark's to the east. And again, we'll walk through that, but as a practical matter, that's the case.
Hey, another question,
Yeah.
if I could, before you move. Can you flip back, please? So on the top one, is the city bound by any restrictions on selling this to private individual or entity?
We're not necessarily bound by it.
I know, like, for instance, schools have some
Yeah,
rules and regulations around that. I didn't know.
we're bound by process.
Okay.
So you can do things like auction it to the highest bidder, and then they have to go through zoning and everything else. You could, there are other ways to dispose of public property. You could go through an RFP process, like the Delaware Place, the Delaware Hotel, the old Delaware Hotel site, that sort of thing.
Okay.
Answer your question?
Yeah, thanks.
So, as I said, we really have no reasonable economic use for the facility. In our facility planning, we don't need that structure. As you know, engineering's moved out of that structure and down to the Public Works facility. As a matter of fact, engineering is not a standalone department. It's part of Public Works now, and at 440 East William. So even if we could use the building, and you see this in your packet, we tried to look in many different ways at the costs related to bringing the building up to this basic building code. We had our building official do some work, as well as go out and get some essentially private sector estimates, if you like, from an architect in terms of there's just sort of basic building code, and then there's really making it marketable in the marketplace. Those numbers vary widely, as you saw. But I think the practical reality is if you put it on market through any kind of disposal process that we might go through, you would probably need to look more towards that market rate number. We do know that we need additional parking with safe access. If we can't create a public parking lot that doesn't have safe access. So I think that's pretty obvious. The thing you may or may not know is that we are going through a process with the Gazette building now of trying to fulfill the comprehensive plan's vision for the City Hall campus, in part by working with economic development and a private sector business for a co-working space. And Chuck can explain that more if you care to understand it, but that would basically be the first floor and City Hall offices on the second floor of the Gazette building. And we're going through a process now with that company and council to see if we can't come to an agreement. Looks pretty promising at this point, I think. So in part, we're going to need parking for that opportunity as well, beyond just the 20 spaces, and it's not really 20 here when you have a drive aisle, and you can't park out here and block the drive aisle. So it's something less than 20 some spaces here at the City Hall complex. And the parking plan, again, for this parcel was basically attempt to create more parking. One of the things we did is we reached out to the neighbor to the east several times to try to work with them for some shared access that could basically get us out to Union Street and maybe make even more of a parking lot back there and share some costs and expenses of that sort of thing. There's been no interest expressed from that party in moving forward, so we're kind of stuck going to the east. The Gazette building covers, and you can see it right outside the window, it covers the entire parcel, and the entire thing is needed for the renovated use that I just described. The property to the south, as you know, falls off pretty significantly. Even if you could negotiate the turns and everything, by the time you put a ramp in there, you have no space in the back as a practical matter, and not even sure you could do that to the south. Assuming that property owner is willing to do that. That leaves one direction going north, and the current single drive is just not safe. So the idea is to create a new public parking lot that is safe, accessible, and visible, meets our parking needs, utilizes our new branding and that sort of thing, and is available for the uses that we can put the Gazette building and our campus to, as well as provide some additional parking to, obviously, downtown, but particularly the sort of south of William block of downtown, which doesn't, less this building, really have any public parking. Again, here's the plan. And one thing I did is I went ahead and colored up the footprint so that it's a little easier to see on the parking lot concept plan where the footprint of the existing building, the one we're talking about demolishing, is, because I just thought that might be helpful too. That's all I have tonight. Tom, I don't know if you wanted to add some remarks.
Yeah, just a couple of things. Recognize, I know Mayor Riggle is here as well, to if there's any questions from City Council, because we did take action. City Council did back in May to amend our capital improvement program to provide funding for this. And I think that's how you initially heard about this. And that was unfortunate that you heard about it that way. That wasn't our intent. Obviously, we know that we have a Historic Preservation Commission and guidelines and restrictions that we have to follow. One thing I would like to point out, and just kind of, we're adding, the net spaces in this lot is 10 to 12 spaces, but the net available to the public would be more like 30. Right now, it's not, practically speaking, the public does not access this parking lot. It's accessed primarily by City Hall employees and occasionally members of the public who may know about it. But it's kind of it's hard to get into that lot and it's hard to get out of that lot. It's very narrow. On a farmer's market Friday, Saturday morning, practically speaking, you just can't get in there. There's just so much traffic around there, and just generally, so the public is not parking back there. So it's not like it's a municipal public parking lot that currently has 20 available spaces that we're making 10 more available. It's a kind of inaccessible surface lot that we use, that we want to make available to the public, primarily after 5 and on the weekends, but probably during the day as well, just depending on what ultimately, what happens with the Gazette building. So that's the first thing, is that it's we want to establish it as a bona fide municipal public parking lot, because if you take a look at the parking study that NKSK did, they indicate that on first Fridays, the William Street lot is 100% full at peak hours at 7 o'clock. And on Friday evenings, it's at 100%. During the week, it's at about 64%. So if you take a look at what we're adding into the downtown over the next several years in terms of new businesses, second and third floor remodeling, with people moving into the downtown, there will be increasingly more demand on parking. And that was the the genesis of our parking study, was to evaluate that and determine ways of addressing it. So I think this would, I know this would help with the William Street corridor and with relieving some of the William Street capacity issues that we have. At any given night, you can come out on a Friday or Saturday night and that lot's full. And we recognize that there are lots that are not at capacity, but we also recognize that the nature of people and parking is to try to get as close as you can. So we think it would add, it will add capacity. We want to ensure that it looks nice, that it's well done. And the other thing to point out is that we no longer need a piece of property. We no longer need the real estate. And I think the question was asked by Commissioner Hatton about the building. Could we sell it? Yes, we could sell it. We've thought about that. We could rent it. The trick is that if we lease it or if we sell it, we will inevitably be in a negotiation over how much parking gets to go with the building. It's, obviously the value of that building to a real estate office, to a law office, or any number of services, professional services, is how many parking spaces do we get with it. We're already negotiating some use of the parking with the Cohatch, the co-working space proposal we're talking about. So to avoid that issue, and recognizing that we need the additional capacity for service lot, we've come to the conclusion that taking it down and establishing a parking lot makes the most sense. We bought it in the early 2000s when we were kind of at capacity in this building. The engineering department we needed to add capacity, so we bought the house. I think we paid, I can't recall, it's in the report. We bought it from the Thompson family. They had owned it as part of the Gazette, as part of their newspaper business. And it served us quite well for a number of years. But then we consolidated we did a reorganization, and we consolidated, we bought the piece of property at 440 East William Street out by the Point, the old handle factory that was back there. We bought that, we renovated it, and we consolidated engineering into public works. So they're in one campus now. So that just left us with this surplus piece of property on top of the Gazette building, which we bought really more as a protective purchase because we could buy it for a fairly good price. And as Dave said, we're now in the process of evaluating some alternative uses for that. So that's just by way of background. City Council, as I said, took action in May when they amended the CIP to include funding for the project. And I think one of our objectives is to demonstrate to the public that we're serious about addressing what is increasingly a good problem to have. But unless we come up with the solutions to the good problem, it will soon be a problem where people are going to say, why can't you address this? You need to, it's not just about signage and things like that, it's about adding capacity, and I think this will achieve that goal.
That it?
So with that, Mr. Chairman, as staff, we would recommend approval, and there are a number of conditions that we recommend that are contained in your staff report as well. Happy to answer any questions you might have.
Commission members have any questions for city staff?
Yeah, I've got a couple. In the concept drawing presently up on the screen, it shows an approach into the adjacent property on the east. And I understand from the packet and the presentation that was deemed difficult because of the grade, but I guess I'm questioning if that's in the concept drawing that, maybe that is possible.
Are you talking about here?
Yes, I assume
That's a turnaround.
Oh, I see.
Because if you get in here, in this bit, you need to be able to turn around.
Okay,
That's all. So that the wall that's there would still remain.
I got you.
That probably need maybe a little bit of work.
No, I just can't read drawings.
No, it's understandable. I like to get over that grade, even if you could go to the south. I mean, you realistically be backing up somewhere in here.
Yeah. Well, just to Also then, with those two essentially islands there that flank the turnaround, kind of tagging on to Commissioner Hatton's comments about the net gain of parking spaces, looks like at least two more that you lose from the present absence of those medians or those curbs.
You really, I park back there as a staff member, it's one of my assigned parking spaces. I admit I drive a very large truck. Those are really unusable parking spaces right now. We can only park in the spaces where you're seeing designated out. And actually, when staff plows snow and whatnot, that's generally where they push it, because to be able to back in and turn around there, you really do need to leave those open. When I first was assigned back there, I was actually assigned the one that begins the building far in the back. And they quickly figured out that wasn't going to work. I had no place to go, so they parked across from me.
I think as a functional matter, it functions basically like this, although it's not pretty.
Yeah. Well, and I understand in a large vehicle that might be difficult. And as someone that drives a subcompact, I think I could probably make my car fit in there and maneuver out. But so I don't know. To me, it just looks like that might be a couple more spaces that might, potentially be gone. Are they the best spaces or optimal spaces? Probably not. But if the parking lot's full and you've got a small vehicle, you can probably get it in there with a 2-point maneuver.
Mhm.
Okay.
No, please go ahead.
That's
Mr. Nicely?
Okay, thank you. First question is simply regarding the proposed parking lot. Is it going to be metered after hours, or would it be basically
We haven't,
time limited? Or
we really haven't decided yet. That's really part of a larger discussion that we need to have about the pricing of our public parking in the downtown. I think the initial thought would be it would be available after 5 and on the weekends. Kind of depending on ultimately what shakes out with the number of city employees that are going to have to be parking back at the St. Mark's lot, which we lease. We'll have to evaluate that. I don't know at this point. And it's, as they say, we really are at a point in our downtown with the parking that we've got to make some hard decisions about how we price it and whether it should all be metered, some of it metered, whether it's kiosks. This would lend itself to a kiosk where you pull in and you operate the kiosk first, you put a sticker on your windshield. I'm not sure that's what we'll do or not, but the idea is that it's be public.
We're also, as Tom mentioned, negotiating with the company to utilize space for local co-working space. And as part of that negotiation, they're obviously looking at having a number of dedicated spots, and then that's been part of the negotiation. Do those spots even become open after hours, after typical business hours? Obviously, with the nature of the co-working facility, people can come and go as they please. It's not really a 9 to 5 going operation, as you know. So we're trying to figure that out right now, even with that company. How are they going to best utilize parking? If you're talking 125, 150 member co-working operation with lots of nightly events and activities, that could be an incredibly well-utilized parking lot.
okay, thank you. And just for the record, I just wanted to recognize, I know that questions about parking and the use of the Gazette building are somewhat beyond the very strict purview of what we're discussing tonight, but I see it as parts of the same question ultimately, which is what generates my questions.
Yeah, makes sense.
Question for staff. We have some new members and maybe some folks in the audience. Could you explain the process? What happens tonight if our decision is negative? If there's an appeal process, who hears that appeal?
Yep. We would ask for action tonight if that's possible, and it's obviously up to you. But what would happen? It takes 4. You're all here, so it would take 4 votes to do anything. 4 votes to approve. If it's not approved, then it is not just technically, it is denied. You're the decision-making body, and by code, there's a 30-day window where the city could appeal to City Council your decision. And that has happened in the past, pretty rare, but
Right.
it's happened a handful of times, at least in the 12 years I've been here.
In this case, the applicant would appeal to the applicant.
That's effectively correct.
Okay. That's an unusual position for us all to be in, I think.
Yes. A little different.
We could have carved these out, these public properties, when we did this.
I'm sorry, what?
We could have carved these properties out of the HPC when we did the ordinance. I mean, they're part of the, it's public property. We're trying to adhere to the same standard.
Considering we're trying
But it's
to
hard.
put the county in, it might not have looked real good to
Yeah.
bring them in and carve the
Sure.
city out. No.
Sure.
Please.
I do have a question, just regarding the negotiations with the co-op and the Gazette building. Basically, is that weighing the decision on tonight's approval? Are negotiations going to
No.
be coming to an end?
No.
Okay.
I think
Well,
I
I
just-
agree. And
Okay.
The owner of the company is very concerned about the building being there and the ability for us to best serve him in terms of parking,
Yeah,
whether we're designated spaces or in a continual format. I mean, one of the things that he's looked at is 2 others, and we have 6 hotel developers looking in right now. One of the things we're looking at, especially in this area, is where's the parking? Where can we put valet parking? Where can we do this? Where can we do that? So one of his considerations, and he's looked at a multitude of properties, probably 4 properties down here before he started negotiating with us, was where can I best maximize parking? So, I mean, this parking lot's very instrumental to him, obviously.
Mhm.
The BP lot, I mean, again, you're talking 125 and 150 members. This would be an incredibly well utilized first and lower level building. So it's very important to him. Is it a deal breaker? I don't think so, but we really don't know the answer to that question.
I think, to Commissioner, regardless of that, we're a growing city. You all know that, and fairly rapidly growing. The need for city offices and personnel is not going anything but, you know what? And I think we own the Gazette building, and we're looking at that facility and looking at ways to renovate that facility for our offices as well. This would be part of that deal potentially, but the parking is necessary for that operation regardless, and necessary to just create more parking opportunities, as the city manager said, in general, in terms of capacity. So I think that those arguments stand on their own, in my mind anyway.
Any further comments from commission?
So if I may, to the extent possible, I'm wondering if we can have any further information regarding either architectural firms that have been contracted to help develop the removal of this if it goes through, or this new co-work project, if there's any information about the business that we would be partnering with. Because I think if we are discussing removing public property for a public-private partnership, essentially, it's good to have some sense of what we're dealing with. So I don't know if you have any information you can share yet on that.
Yeah, we can either provide information for a subsequent meeting prior to that meeting. We can give you an overview of the company now, what we're working on, but yes, that's doable.
Okay.
Just up,
I mean, John could probably give you the 30 seconds.
Yeah, if
It might be good if you just
there's
tell
a
them
soundbite.
about it to me. I think you could do.
Yeah, I guess the name has come up several times. Yeah, can you pull?
Cohatch?
It's okay, keep talking. They're down in Worthington now if you want to go see
Yeah.
it.
This is essentially in itself, and, you know, we're a very startup and entrepreneurial friendly community. We're working to develop an entrepreneur center here, for instance, hopefully across the street in a building facing the wrong direction. But this in itself is kind of a startup company that's done very well for itself in the Worthington area. He's actually working on his second facility in Worthington, who would be technically the third facility that he'd be starting up. And he hopes to have these in other suburban communities around Columbus with a philosophy that once you join, you can actually operate in any of those facilities and meet clients wherever you need to, or so on and so forth. But it is a typical co-working space where you're really paying a membership fee in different levels. Some people might pay for actually having permanent office space. There could be 6 to 8 maybe permanent offices in there for companies that are, again, third or second or third tier companies, but second, third phase companies, well funded, who are, just in that next stage out of an entrepreneur center. This is actually a growth opportunity for us as well, to take people out of an entrepreneur center and move them into that next level of office, that with hopes that as that company continues to grow, we can then stick them into larger office spaces in the downtown area, hopefully, as we continue to renovate those. This one's a little bit different, I think, than what you'll see with like one of the national franchise co-working spaces, like a Regis or somebody of that nature, because they offer a lot of programming, educational programming. They offer a lot of community programming. For instance, if somebody goes in and utilizes the common area space for events and activities, the way they pay for that space is actually making a donation to a local nonprofit. They do offer a free office space to a nonprofit each year. Actually, it's longer. I think it's an 18-month contract to help that nonprofit get its feet on the ground before then it has to go in for office space that it has to pay for probably someplace else. But yeah, it's a very community-centric co-working space model, and that was one of the reasons I think we were attracted to it over a lot of the other co-working spaces out there. Plus, we worked to attract them. We went to Worthington, went to their facility, and really asked them to take a look at Delaware. So this was definitely an attraction project.
I think one of the key aspects for us is that they are going into a model of renovating a building with Worthington as well, not dissimilar from what we're discussing.
Building and
The old
So
Worthington
they have
Library
experience in that.
on the green is now leased to this company, and they've completed the renovations.
so they do have experience in these public-private partnerships.
They're not, this is not the first time it's not the easiest project anyway, so. It's good to have experience.
Designated spaces there and city lots were used with that new facility. So that's one of the reasons I think they have expectations from us that they'll get the same here.
Tom, is that the library or the old Masonic?
The library.
The library.
Yeah, that's library on the green, and they also then purchased a building a few years ago right on their main street there. And I know Carolyn's been down there. Most of the council.
If there are no other comments from commission members?
So I had a question for Dave. What's the timeline on this?
On the request for demolition, I mean, we would respectfully ask to move forward because we're in the middle of budgeting process now and discussion with this company, as you just heard. So to know what we have here, or to know if we have to make an appeal or that sort of thing. We're getting near the end of the year when we have to pass a budget pretty soon. So that's the timeline. When would you make a parking lot? Not till
Probably 2018 is when we actually get the lot done. It'd be nice to get the building done and start getting the site prepped. Come back to you with the design, what it's going to look like, and the elements that we include in that would hopefully reflect some of the just historical architecture of the downtown. It is a parking lot, so we are somewhat limited, but we do know that we've got high standards, whether it's a parking lot or a building improvement.
Well, I have a lot of questions about this.
I've got comments, but.
I have a comment also, too, not to interrupt you.
Okay, I thought everybody's just feeling real happy here, and I'm gonna
No.
be nasty.
I know in the report it says this is not a historically significant building, but I view it as a very beautiful historic building for Delaware. And that's a very sterile strip out here. It's once you pass Sarah Moore, especially on the south side, the two churches, and then it's, just nothing really. And then now we're going to have a parking lot there with the BP station across the street and another parking lot. And I don't think it creates the historical look as you enter from Williams Street into the downtown area. And I think it's very upsetting to have to decide to tear down this very sound building for a parking lot. And I also don't really understand if the public's going to have much use of the parking spaces. It sounds like they're going to be sort of spoken for.
I mean, I think that according to our parking study, and I think just, you know it just by being in the downtown, our peak times are weekends in the evening.
Oh, I'm down here a lot,
Right.
yeah.
So in the weekends in the evening, it's available.
Mhm.
It'll be a municipal public parking lot.
Well, not really if the Cohatch is
Well, I
going.
mean, even if you take five to 8 of those spaces, you're gaining 25 spaces for the public. So
Maybe I'm misunderstanding.
Yeah.
And when you say there
Yeah.
could be 125 people working there, I think it would
Well,
be more
they're
than 5 or
members.
6
it's
cars.
not members, meaning, yeah, they do that in Worthington now. So the negotiation is for, can you assign, what's the assignment of X number of spaces? But, yeah, I hear you. And that's something that Dave and I, he's been very clear to me from the very outset that this is a planning 101 for a planner. This is not easy at all, and I understand that. But I also understand we have parking needs.
We do.
This is not a solution to a parking need. You're going to add 8 or 9 spaces and take 2 away on the street. It's still going to have poor. I've got a lot of problems with this. As a career-long historic preservationist and an architectural designer specializing in historic buildings and preservation and sensitive rehabilitation, I think it is more than mildly hypocritical of the city to select a building in the city historic district. And this is a building that is not in bad condition. Compared to a lot of the properties I have helped renovate, it's in pretty sound condition. And it's large, and it's in a great location. It's got a few extraneous additions that have porches and things that have been put on it. But this is not a building that's ready for the junk pile. It's architecturally significant, I believe. It's Italianate in style, which is the vast majority of what much of the historic downtown and surrounding neighborhoods is. It has many uses, and it grinds me that the city is using a kind of a combination of flawed reasoning and demolition by neglect to get rid of the most historic building on that whole block. It's older than the Gazette building, it's older than the City Hall, it's older than the church, it's older than anything to the south of it. It's the most historic building on that block, and it's in the City Historic District. And I think it's an offense to this commission, who is empowered to help protect the historic resources in this downtown. Every month we hear lots of cases where people are wanting to renovate and improve buildings that are not nearly as significant or as useful as this building. And I'm a little upset by this. I'm about to open this up to the public if there are no other comments from commissioners.
And I'll try not to chew over the same roundup that you just did, but many of the same points I agree with. But, not too long ago, we did not approve surface parking on Franklin Street, also in a sub-district of the historic district. I mean, that was an example where we felt the surface parking would be inappropriate, so close, and this is even more visible. Before I was on the commission, but, certainly within my memory, another Italianate down the street next to Sarah Moore was raised to provide parking. And I'm sure they made many of the same arguments, but yet, we lost another piece of the fabric of the approach, as Commissioner Rivera mentioned, one of the major approaches into downtown. One of the things that, I think distinguishes our downtown from a lot of downtowns is we don't have a lot of so-called missing teeth. We have intact an intact streetscape made up largely of historical buildings. And this is a very visible building, and so I'm concerned about, taking another one out. Especially because it's really just a short-term fix on the parking. That's not going to fix the long-term parking. In the packet that was given to us, it references the parking study, and I'll quote it, I'll read it. Both plans indicate the long-term need to study a possible parking garage. While this is still something that needs to be accomplished in the long term, perhaps having more surface parking may push out in time the need for such a structure. Well, I just am really not, I just can't find it hard to accept irrevocably taking a historic structure out of our downtown that is a good looking structure. It's historic, it's in good shape, and taking something out like that for essentially a short-term Band-Aid that's going to net us maybe half a dozen parking spaces. By the time you factor in the curbs at the east end of the lot, the street parking that is taken out. And so it's not going to net us that much. In the packet itself and in the parking studies, they say eventually we're going to have to look at something more substantial than what you're going to gain here. And I think it does, it does signal that we can find it acceptable to rip down historic structures, and I think that's totally the wrong thing to signal out of this commission and out of the city. I think it sends the wrong message, and I think it's going to be something that's going to be pointed to. Whether it's a precedent or not can be argued, but it's going to be pointed to in many presentations that we receive down the road about the economic viability of a specific property and what's a realistic outcome for that. So that's my thought on it.
And I have comments as well, if I could. So yeah, this is a difficult position. Because who the applicant is, right? And then who the appeal source is, but also because I'm a citizen, a taxpayer, and I sit on this commission. So I look at this from different perspectives, and I have different hats, I guess. So I'm going to try and keep this to my HPC hat and not so much my citizen hat. Although I tell you, I don't know that my opinion changes that much depending which hat I have on. So I jotted down some thoughts tonight before I came in, and Mr. Coleman kind of hit on the one. We use this term a lot, but why would we willingly create a gap in the smile of downtown? Why would we knock out one of the teeth in really what is our entryway or our gateway to the public? It is, with the 23 bypass out there, it's probably the main entry into town. It's not the most beautiful aspect of our city. This will not improve that. I also, we've talked about this a lot on this commission. We talk about it in my neighborhood. We talk about it I used to live in Old Town East in Columbus. You can't bulldoze yourself. You can't bulldoze your way into a successful downtown. You can't bulldoze yourself into a successful neighborhood. Subtracting historic and fully functional buildings is not an addition to downtown. Demolition's permanent. Once it's gone, it's gone. There's no going back. There's no do-overs. It's a lost opportunity. If you go into any other downtown, from a big city to Sunbury is a good example. Look at the little houses just off the squares that are art galleries. That could be a fantastic, you're talking about hotels. What a great place for a bed and breakfast right downtown. If we tear that down, it's a parking lot. It's no longer functional. I talk to property owners, I talk to the business owners. Everybody who wants to put a business in downtown wants to buy their building, right? Well, as the prices go up, guess what isn't for sale? Buildings. I fail to believe, you put the county, I don't want to get too much into the dollars and cents, but it's kind of what I do for a living. The county appraises that at $195. None of us in this room would sell our house for what the county appraises. And I'm sure my real estate agent over here would agree with that, right? It's a much, much lower value than is actually market value. I think that building, I fully understand negotiating parking places, but let's face it, there's a price for everything. You could sell that without parking spaces. You could keep your existing parking spaces. You could sell that building. what that would accomplish is it would put a business in there, it wouldn't knock the tooth out, it would put a business in there, which adds to the fabric and the vitality of downtown, but also adds to our tax base, right? A surface parking lot doesn't add anything to the tax base. A bed and breakfast would, because it has employees. Certainly a microbrewery or a restaurant would. So I hate to see, because of, I've lived in this city for 17 years, and when I first moved up here, the first thing I heard from people is downtown's dead, they ought to pave it over and build a Walmart. Okay, well, thankfully we didn't do that 17 years ago, and there's still people who are looking, because they come in front of us. We'd like to tear this building down. I'd like to have parking. Everybody wants to have a cool downtown and then tear the building down next to them so they can have parking. That's not practical, but yet that's what you're telling us you want to do. So how can we on this commission talk to the private citizens that come in front of us and say, no, you can't do that, but yet the city goes, do as we say, not as we do? I have a big problem with that. It just, I think, is absolutely sending the wrong message to everybody else in downtown who's made an investment in their property and their businesses. I think it's absolutely the wrong message. I'm not going to get too much into dollars and cents, but you can crunch the numbers at what that house is worth, what you're paying to demolish it, and come up with literally an astronomical figure for each of those parking spaces. Okay, we can play numbers all day long, but if you figure that house at $150,000 without the parking, and then put the number that you provided us of $136,000, that's $286,000. Now your net creating anywhere between 6 and 7 spaces, because you're giving up street spaces, right? So at net 6 or 7 spaces. So if you add that together, that's almost, it's 40, depending what numbers you put on it, $45,000 per space. That's insane. That's way more than a parking ramp would cost per space. I remember back in the 2020 plan, I think the number for parking was, a parking ramp was like $20,000 per space, and people went, wow, that's crazy. But if you look at a going rate of $75 a month, that would take 53 years to pay back just your investment. And that's without service on the debt, taxes, maintenance, anything else. So the city, and the reason I bring up parking is because the city has spent so much of this application saying this is the straw man. It's parking, it's parking, it's parking. I don't think it is parking. I think it's, you guys want what no one else downtown can have, which is parking at your front door. I look around here, we see reserved spaces. Everybody parks. Now, I don't work for them. The Chase just comes to mind, the Chase branch office. Guess who doesn't park on Chase property? Chase employees. Why? Because they want their customers to be able to park there. We've got, what I think, 7 reserved spots here. This other spots are, maybe you can park there, but you can't park there before 10, Monday through Thursday. There's a lot of verbiage on that sign. Feels like I'm in downtown Manhattan. People can't really utilize these spaces at any time anybody wants to be down here, right? If I want to go eat at Backstretch, I can't park here because it says I can't park here before 10, right? I can't park in your spot, I can't park in the mayor's spot because that just says verboten. Those are there 24/7. So, it seems to me that, honestly, I can't think of a better way to sum this all up, and I apologize for running long, but it seems that this is a solution in search of a problem. I just can't come up with a better summation of what this is for me. I think it's absolutely a horrible message to send to the private sector, the people that come in front of us, the people that in my time on this commission, in my 17 years in the city, have played by the rules, and now we're saying we're going to suspend the rules because we're the city and we want this. I think that's a horrible message to send. So I'll stop at that.
I have an alternate solution that will result in more square footage and more parking by saving the 20 East William Street building. If you consider demolishing the last section, the furthest south section of the Gazette building, which is almost all one-story loading dock, and there was a printing press in there, and that's where all of the newsprint came in and was printed and then went out again. It's a loading dock.
We had.
It's one story.
We had.
take the back 2/3 of that off, about where that line is drawn, even with the back of City Hall, and connect those parking lots. And then you have two out driveways, one in and out on Sandusky Street. You have two one-way, you could make them either direction you want, but you'd have two one-way access to the remaining parking. You add parking space in the rear, and you connect it all together. Much better solution than what you're proposing. Just from a space point of view, you're going to save, what is that house, 3,000 square feet? So you're going to take down 1,600 feet of loading dock. This one story with no basement under it. It's from a logistics point of view, what you're proposing not only violates what we're here to enforce, but it doesn't even do a very good job of achieving what you want to achieve. It's just, I'm upset and offended by this proposal, and I intend to vote against it unless I hear some miraculous
Well, let me
other
just
addition.
respond for the record that we had considered that. That's not that's an option that we had looked at. We actually had considered taking that rear piece of the building off and improving the circulation through there. The negotiations currently with the interested party is they're interested in that space being used for their co-working space. So that's the balance. We understand that would help with circulation.
That facility that you're courting, that could be anywhere in the city. It doesn't have to be next to City Hall.
Yeah, you've got a point, but we also have a vacant building that we bought. We're trying to improve the economic development activity in the downtown. One of the survey responses that we did 2 years ago, two things came out primarily: economic development opportunity for residents and parking and traffic congestion. So to suggest that the city does not concern itself with the historic fabric of this community is disingenuous. Absolutely. We have spent more money, public funds, making this downtown viable, coupled with private sector investment and all the other things that go into making the downtown vibrant, a burgeoning regional economy, and a number of other factors. But we care about this downtown. And to suggest that we're here kind of, hypocritically asking for permission to take down a building. And we understand
the
that.
only historic building that you own.
Just let me finish, please. We may not own the downtown, but we have invested a lot of dollars in the downtown. We have an investment to protect. The city does. The taxpayers do. That's the balance. I get it. But please don't suggest that we're trying to ignore this. We established the district. We established the commission. I was here when that happened. And we've been very much involved in trying to make the downtown as viable as it can be. And this was not just willy-nilly, let's just take the house down. This was looking at parking across the street on Friday and Saturday nights after 7 is 100% full. And we have 25 to 30 spaces available across the street and you can't get to them. How do you explain that to the average taxpayer who said, wait, you've got parking? We get the balance, but and the commission can vote no, and then we'll have to evaluate it. City council will ultimately have to evaluate it. But trying to explain to the public, you've got William Street's 100% full. Look at the study. Saturday night, Friday night, first Fridays, people are circling around the block looking for spaces. And we've got 25 spaces back here. You can't get to them. And Commissioner Hatton, I agree with you completely about the haphazard signage down here, but on the second Thursday of the month, you can't park in this space. That needs to get improved, and one of the recommendations is to get rid of the confusing signage. But we have a problem, and that problem in long term, it's not adding 25 spaces or 20 spaces, whatever it nets out to be. It's we have a problem, and that's what we're trying to balance. is where, we hear from people, where can I park? I circled your block. Well, you can park down on Union Street. I didn't know there was parking down there, and it's there. But you know the nature of how people
Tom,
park.
you're not going to change the parking
I know.
equation with this. You're going to add about 6 parking spaces.
Psychologically, right now, people don't know there's parking back there. And even if they did know it, it's kind of tough to get back there and tough to get out because you're coming out, it's very narrow. So I guess I respect the work you folks do and what you're charged with doing. But the city is invested in what's happening in this community, the heritage of this community is the commission.
The heritage.
The heritage.
And you're proposing tearing down the only historic building the city owns.
We didn't,
That's
10 years ago,
ludicrous.
we didn't own it. It's not like we've had this, it's not like it was part of City Hall that went back 200 years. We bought it for office space, which we no longer need. It's not a piece of City Hall. We're not recommending that we take down City Hall.
If the city were a private entity coming forward with this proposal, there's about 0% chance that it would even have a prayer of passing this commission. I'm unmoved. You're going to add 6 parking spaces at a cost of hundreds of thousands of dollars. You could lease this thing. You could have all the parking in the back, take down a little bit of the loading dock. You could have more parking, more access, more ingress and egress, and you could have a functioning business or more office space in the future in a historic building that's really in pretty good shape. It's got a brand new metal roof, and it's obviously had some renovation work on the inside because the city used it for offices. I've been in there. It's not falling down. It's not a bad building. It's worthy of restoration.
I'd just like to kind of add to what Roger's saying about the back of this building of the Gazette and using that as a co-op kind of solution. But in the long-term run, have you ever thought taking the value from that building, going towards trolley trains or something that feed from the fairgrounds that we only use so many times a year, have public parking there, we trolleyed them down. I mean, I live close. I live 2 blocks from downtown, so my family walks. We never have to worry about parking. That's why our Northwest area is so valuable. People are selling their homes at values that are crazy. Look, you wouldn't even think 3 years ago they would go for that price. But if we could take the money from the sale of this historical building that could be a great bed and breakfast or something like that, go towards trolley trains, make our town even more charming, have parking the fairgrounds 2.5, 3 miles away, not even that.
Yeah, and the Hayes parking lot, which is probably underutilized because, other people know where it is or just don't want to walk that far. I mean, that would be, something you could also do that include in that kind of a service and, try to, mitigate some of the parking concerns, I guess, but yeah.
I just think it could be creative. I think there's a solution for both, though I don't think it's this building.
Can I just add a couple of things I already talked about? So I wanted to kind of bring this home a little bit. And one of the things I wanted to point out was really what this boils down to. I don't know how hard it would be to get back to one of your original slides, Jay, but there's 2 criteria for demolition. And clearly, this is a historic structure. You can't really argue around that. So one's off the table. And I think you guys, so all of this seems to be based on 2, and I haven't really seen any supporting evidence from you all on 2. What I see is a lot of parking. Parking isn't up there. Economic use is, and clearly that building has economic use. That building has market value. You don't have to put a paintbrush on the thing. Everything has value as is. In fact, it would be money wasted to do anything else because the next owner may want to do something else with it. That's really what this boils down to. You guys have focused in on the parking and this tenant that may or may not go in there. I haven't really heard whether is this quid pro quo once that's done. Is this part of a contract? Is this still open? Same with tearing that down. it seems like we've taken a lot off the table based on this potential renter, whatever you want to call it there, in the tenant, thank you, in that building. And it seems like we've sort of marched into this very narrow, this is the only way out on this. But if we come full circle on this, it doesn't meet either one of those. And so I don't see how we could, I think parking lots are the neatest thing in the world, but as my task and my charter on this commission is to follow these regulations, and I don't see that the city has met either one of those. So, you know, we can argue about 6 spaces, 7 spaces, infill, incubators, all that kind of stuff. I don't think you guys have met this. That's, I think, what it comes down to for me.
So if I could add, obviously, a lot of very passionate feelings on this matter, as we would expect there would be. I would recognize, I think the city acts in good faith here. I have no urge to disparage the city staff or the city manager or anyone else in the room with the suggestion that you're not acting in good faith. But I think at the same time, many of the arguments that have been made regarding alternate uses for this location are strong arguments. I think that the question of the precedence this would set, given the realities we deal with as the Historic Preservation Commission, week or month after month, I think that's a valid concern, because it does set an unusual precedent to have our own city come before us and make this argument. And I think ultimately it comes down to this question is, if we move and we chip away and we chip away and we chip away from the edges, do we go from being an historic business district to basically a Sandusky Street landing strip? Nice decorative buildings right up Sandusky with not much else on either side. And that's the concern I think we need to consider.
At this point, I'm going to open this up to public comment. We've heard from the applicant. We have not heard from the public. As the beginning of that public comment, I have received 2 letters from people, both opposed to this, and I've made copies for commission members. Here's one for the city.
Give me a hand with that if you want.
Oh, well, that would be fine. Yes. Let me have one. Oh, there's the original.
I'll tell you what, if you want to
Give
give
me
me one
the file,
stack,
no.
Okay.
You need one, and I need.
Okay. Well, I know what this is. If you have extras, I could use one.
Sure.
Thank you.
While these are being handed out, I'm going to read this into the public record. The first is a letter from Larry and Marion Vance, 188 North Franklin Street. Dear Chairman Koch, we appreciate this public opportunity to respond to the Historic Preservation Commission case number 2017-2403, the demolition permit for 20 East William Street. We strongly encourage the commission to deny this permit. This home has been a contributor to the downtown streetscape for many years. It has honorably served many residents and business occupants. It has remained architecturally strong and can continue to serve this community. Many properties such as this home have become business locations, offices, and even returned to residential facilities. If the need for staff parking is a priority, an alternative to better serve the city and reduce traffic congestion would be to remove the loading dock, 1-floor structure at the back of the former Gazette building. This will enable vehicle movement behind 20 and 18 East William, eliminate the need for a driveway entrance on William Street, and offer additional parking to complement existing 18 East William Street parking. Another alternative use for the William Street building is a badly needed downtown public restroom facility. Downtown merchants are besieged by the public wanting a restroom. Downtown is not even a shopping destination for those with disabilities or urgent restroom needs. The restroom will be even more essential if the DORA proposal is approved. Waynesville and Grand Rapids, Ohio are wonderful examples of how these downtown needs are met. The 20 East William Street building offers the location and can be retrofitted to complement the downtown to meet this need. Thank you for the opportunity to share our views. We hope the demolition approval can be denied and that there will be discussion on the creative reuse of this building. Sincerely, Larry and Marion Vance. The second letter I have is from Maggie Schmidt. Dear Sir, I am writing to add my vote with yours in saving the house on 20 East William Street, Delaware, Ohio. It is a lovely old home built in 1880 and adds charm to the streets of Delaware. No doubt parking is important in any city, but Delaware already has designated parking lots and much parking along its streets. It seems better to build a parking garage on one of those sites and leave the historic buildings to be used and enjoyed by its citizens. There are many creative ways a building can be used to assist its city. Returning it to apartments or offices would benefit the people of Delaware while preserving a piece of Delaware's history. Thank for all you do to make Delaware a better place to live, work, and visit. Sincerely, Maggie Schmidt. I would also, at this time, invite the public in attendance if anybody has any testimony to offer either way on this. Does anybody in the public desire to speak on this issue? Yes, sir. Could you come up and identify yourself for the audio recording and offer your testimony?
My name is Devin Hardwick, and I'm here representing Preservation Ohio. Our board president could not be in attendance this evening, and she offered me to come and throw out my bit of advice. And I wanted to say that the demolition of this building actually extended beyond the city of Delaware. The conversation of this, the loss of this building actually was a point of conversation for our board annual meeting here this past weekend. So people from all over the state of Ohio offered their 2 cents worth in, if you will, to the continued preservation of 20 East William Street. It was actually a matter of heated topic for our annual meeting here this last weekend. And as a preservationalist myself, we so often have this disposable mindset. Since we live in 2017, everything is disposable. Our clothing, our vehicles, it's all disposable. And we're building more and more homes that seem to be disposable. Well, this house is not disposable. It was not meant to be demolished. It was meant to stand as a testament to 1880. It was meant to stand as a testament to the period in which it was built, and to the period and the people in which it was built for, and most importantly, as a testament to the city. And if we lose it, we're stepping away from this wonderful facade that we have, this wonderful welcoming city that we have. And as it's been said so many times this evening, people want to be here, and people want to be here because of how well we have preserved this city. People look up to us. Cities all over the state of Ohio have lost their image, have lost their identity. But we haven't here in Delaware. We haven't lost that identity. As you said, Mr. Hatton, 20 years ago, 17 years ago, downtown was nothing. And look at it today. It's because of the continued preservation of these buildings and of these structures. And to take away a tooth of that, to take away one more building is a step in the wrong direction for this city. And I'm speaking not only in my own personal opinion, but reflecting the feelings and emotions of Preservation Ohio. So I don't mean to reiterate everything else that has been said this evening, but it's very important that we don't take a step away from the image that the city has created for itself. And the destruction of this building is a step away from this glorious image we have. So thank you for that opportunity.
Excuse me, before you leave, can you just state your address for the record?
219 North Sandusky Street, Delaware, Ohio.
Thank you.
Yes.
Are there any other comments from the public? Are there other comments or questions from council members, or commission members? I'm sorry.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, I want to, if I could, Mr. Chair, to clarify something, the Cohatch, I think Mr. Nicely asked if the Cohatch project rose or fell on this application. And Mr. Eflin shook his head no, and Tom, you did as well, but Sean seemed to be a little more debatable about that. So I guess I want to know, is the city going to want to demolish this building regardless of whether the Cohatch project goes through or not?
Yes. I mean, it wasn't really, we were in discussions about taking down that piece of property and, you know, creating parking there before Cohatch.
Because there was some discussion on tearing down the back.
Right.
That building, if the Cohatch project doesn't go through, then would that not be still a viable option?
We'd probably want to take a look at the option that actually we looked at before, which was to improve the circulation by taking down that rear. But the one proposal we had at one point was to not only take down the dock itself, but to remove the house as well. But as Roger pointed out, you don't have to do that. You can improve the circulation just by taking down that rear parking, the loading dock.
I guess I'm wondering if we should wait on this until we see how that turns out.
Possibly. I was going to ask you to consider tabling it, the matter, so we can take a look. I mean, clearly, if I were to take a straw poll tonight, it looks like there's not support to approve the application.
Well, and really, the function of this commission, which was set up by city council, is to make sure that the historic resources are protected and preserved. So
I understand.
this can't be a big shock. Any other actions or questions from commission members?
Mr. Chairman, I just had one clarification. One of the two letters, excuse me, that were read into the record by Maggie Schmidt, in the salutation, it mentions that Ms. Schmidt is from Hilliard, Ohio. Is that accurate?
That's the address on the letter.
Okay, well, I would like to just make sure that was known to the public record that this is from a resident who's not a resident of the city of Delaware.
If there's no other testimony, would the applicant like to address the commission as far as what we can best do at this meeting? What's the best outcome for all concerned?
I'd say table it at this point,
Table it?
unless you're inclined to approve it. And I don't think what I'm hearing, Roger, is that there's not support. You've asked some questions about possible reuse. The vice mayor who chaired the parking study committee couldn't be here tonight. And we talked about your subsequent meeting in October, perhaps being here. But I think, I can see that there's not support. And as you pointed out there, we haven't made that case.
Well, as I'm sure you're well aware, any denial, any decision by this commission is directly appealable to city council. So outside of the city council's conscience and maintaining the historic district.
Can I interject?
Yes, sir.
So I don't think we lose any of our prerogatives by tabling it, and we kind of leave options open for exploration for the co-op in terms of if that turns out that doesn't come to fruition. So he's got an option to look at knocking off the half back or the back half of the set, improving the flow, gaining some spaces, preserving the building. So I think that option, is still there. I guess my concern is if we vote to deny it, it gets appealed immediately, and then that kind of brings the decision to a different body and might not be an outcome that we like.
Well, I think, as the applicant stated, go back, get some more information, maybe look, we're 30 days down the road. Yeah, I don't see a downside to tabling this. In fact, I'd make a motion that we table, that we table, let me get my glasses, that we table 2017-2403.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Hatton, a second by Mr. Coleman. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, call the roll, please.
Mr. Coleman,
Yes.
Mr. Nicely,
Yes.
Ms. Riviera,
Yes.
Ms. Van Gundy,
Yes.
Councilman Rohr,
Yes.
Vice Chairman Hatton,
Yes.
Chairman Cook.
Yes. Thank you very much for coming and presenting this. It's been a joy. Item 4 on the agenda is commission member comments and discussion.
Yeah, I have a comment.
Yes, sir.
I do appreciate what city staff has done and what the city manager, city council has done to generally promote, I think a really nice renaissance downtown and overall maintaining the historic fabric. I know that is genuinely something that they care about, and it's been demonstrated years and years. We may disagree over this previous proposal. Obviously, we have some strong disagreement there, but I don't doubt for a minute that overall their intentions with respect to the historic downtown have been, to promote it. I disagree with that particular project, and I look forward to working with the city in the future.
I agree. We would not have the rejuvenated historic downtown that we have today were it not for city council and the administration's enthusiastic encouragement and participation. And I, for one, have been a participant and a benefactor of that. So this is not a rant and raving attack on city council. The city is why we have the downtown we have today.
I would simply add to that, the one comment that obviously economic growth and vitality and historic preservation must go hand in hand. And I've been on this commission for 6 years. That's something we have taken very seriously at every turn. The balance between preservation of our history and that need for development, the need for growth, and need for vitality and prosperity, both economically and culturally in our downtown. So as everyone else has already said, there's no point in restating the same thing. But suffice to say that I share that sentiment, and I do look forward to working with all of you from the city and continuing that very positive relationship.
Any other commission member comments and discussion? How are we coming with the multitude of illicit signage assaults on our downtown?
How to answer that rather broad, general question. I think we come very well every day. Were there any in particular you're looking at? We make quite a lot of progress on, I think, a number of those issues.
Every time.
The ones that light up, I think, are doors, right?
And light up intermittently.
Yeah, I've noticed the toy shop in particular's light has seemed to find its way back on, changing color in the last couple of weeks, I would say, from what I've noticed personally. So we can work on that one. If there are other specific ones, we can take a look at that too. I know we have through the years.
Are these matters strictly complaint driven?
Well, typically, yeah. We will go out and proactively enforce on obvious sign or
No,
other
there's
violations.
seven inspectors here that are
Yeah.
willing to report at the next meeting.
Yeah. Or you just email or call in and we'll take a look at it. Obviously, I don't have staff here at night.
And I think sometimes just a conversation about that with a violation approach sometimes can be beneficial too.
Yeah, most of the time, that's what we do. We save formal violations in the downtown for when we have to situations, which is probably rare. It's a good thing.
Well, the result, I'm sure, is to get the signage altered to comply rather than gain a fine.
Exactly.
So, are there any other comments or discussion from commission members? Hearing none.
Quick question, just since you're here, Dave. We brought up before the temporary vestibule, which is still, I guess, in beta testing. Any more talk around that? Have you had more applications, inquiries?
We've had a few more inquiries. We haven't had,
I guess we don't have an application process.
we haven't had any more application. We would just follow, at this point, we'd follow the same process we did for that one and just call it beta testing B for somewhere else. We have had a few inquiries and I think found some other solutions for this. Talking to those owners, they're pretty focused on building a new building next door right now and have been for several months. And I'm sure that will preoccupy their time, but I have not talked directly about the vestibule with them for several months. Last time I did, they were interested in trying to keep it on a more permanent basis. So, matter of fact, Diane and I just spoke about that the other day, that we need to probably go through a formal process for that. I haven't heard on the other side of the equation, I haven't heard any complaints about that being out there either, and it seems to work for their needs.
Right.
So in terms of a beta test, at this point, I guess I would call it successful. I'd be interested to hear what you guys might be thinking as well before we might go back and entertain a formal process.
I'd like to see some colonial details.
You want to see some flashing lights on it or something, Roger? Make it light up.
One of the things we had talked about is putting some sort of, I guess, parameters around who can use that, because we looked at whether it's square footage, whether it's
Other
frontage. Yeah, rather than just anybody can have one, because, historically, that's not historical, right? You built either an ingress or, a man trap, as they call it now. But so large restaurants can do that, but I also understand, a business perspective is, well, if I now put that vestibule on the outside, that's 2 more tables. It's not a 2-top or 4-top in there, right?
And it really depends, and we talked about this with that process. It really depends on how the inside of a particular business is arranged, in addition to their size, where you could argue maybe you have more square footage to be able to do something inside.
But if you go down that road, I think you put a lot of subjectivity into it, where square footage or frontage is.
We've looked at it. My opinion as staff to you right now today, and I think the test really just makes me more solid in this opinion, is that we don't formalize that. It's almost impossible for us to come up. We looked at different buildings, different frontages, and tried to come up with, is it square footage, is it size of the building, is it front footage, is it the design of the building, is the door an innie or an outie, is it, that kind of thing. I think we probably just use that as the model for if somebody else wants to come forward. The application has to be put together with the specifics for that location. Obviously, that's on our sidewalk, so the city has something to say about that as well. And those come one at a time to you. The deluge, anticipated or not, of breezeway additions, temporary or not, just hasn't occurred.
Right.
And so I'd say leave well enough alone. Let's work with that applicant and see if we can't make something on a little more permanent basis, finish that process essentially with them. And then if someone else wants to come forward, we treat it like any other exterior environmental change. We have a model now of sorts to kind of take a look at that I think was fairly well designed, is fairly benign for its location.
Yeah,
that's my feeling about it.
My thinking is if you can codify that, if that's a verb, then you eliminate having that person to have to delay and come in front of us. Not that I don't love being here.
I understand there'd be
but
delay.
That's one of the things we hear, right? Is, oh man, I don't want to have to go through. And sometimes I think if you, not that it's onerous, but it's an additional step which leads people to skip that step.
Well, the odds are they're coming before us for some historic approval anyway.
Okay.
At that point, a patio, which is generally handled at the staff level unless there's something funky, but they might be doing something else too.
Okay.
I just, in looking at it, I could not in good conscience put pen to paper and come up with something that would work in even the 70th, 75th percentile situation, because we have different sidewalk widths and we have different entryways and that kind of thing. The one thing I'll say is to your commission, of any of the commissions, we run to the 11th hour of accepting applications and working with people to get them
Right.
complete, and you meet monthly and you make decisions very, very rapidly for the most part, unless there are details to work out or controversy as there appears to be, or disagreement as there appears to be tonight. So this commission runs pretty fast. And it's also the cheapest application we have, at $50.
One thing, and I'm sure Diane relayed this to you, that we did mention as we talked about these, because not everybody was 100% on board, I think even on the commission.
Right.
Was that I think the majority felt that if they already had a patio,
Yep.
now this vestibule wasn't in the public, still public right away, I guess legally, but it's not in the thoroughfare.
And I
right?
think
And I
that's
think
a
that
good
makes a big
test.
difference.
I think that's a very good test for anybody that might come before you. And that one that we've used is just people making inquiries. Well, are we just sticking this on the sidewalk, or do you have sort of it's still in the public realm, but it's sort of the private patio space?
Right.
And you're eating up your own space, just happens to be outside.
Right. You don't have to walk around it.
I think that's a good test.
Okay.
I would remind as well, during that initial discussion, when we were putting up this vestibule as a beta test, there was a discussion too about the seasonality of it. The idea that it would only be something that could be applied during the colder winter months, which was the initial justification for putting it up by the applicant. And that might be something to consider if we are talking about ways to expand or even somewhat formalize this process, to keep in mind the purpose behind it was to give a windbreak, essentially, during the cold months.
Recall the applicant, and I recall this, the applicant did come back, because I took several meetings of discussion, and remarked that, oh, the same thing happens just with warmth in the summertime and air conditioning. And I mean, I happen to eat over there a lot. I know a lot of you guys do, so see you there, and we've all feel that. It is true. But again, for that particular location, which may not be, I think you have to distinguish these. I think you have sort of the in the patio or out of the patio test, which is definitely something to look at. And I think you have sort of this black vinyl, sort of fairly benign approach to it design-wise, yet something that holds up to the wind loads and that sort of thing from a building code perspective. But those are pretty good tests. We also have to look at the side, that not all the sidewalks are as wide or as free of signs and, fire hydrants and lots of the stuff we're putting out there.
And I think it's a valid point. I mean, the whole of our legal system in this country centered around common law. We start with precedent, we start with what's happened in the past, but we have flexibility.
Yep.
And I mean, that's a hallmark of government for us and of commission work in this case. We
Yep.
have to have some common sense as well.
I view that more as a variance kind of a one-off variance kind of condition, and so far it has been.
Each one you approve makes it a little harder to deny one that you think isn't justified.
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman, and that's how you get zoning codes that change over the years. Once you get, 10 of them or the majority of them, then it's probably just go ahead, time to change the code. I don't think we're there yet. That's my opinion.
Any other comments or discussion? Then I would point out that our next regularly scheduled meeting will be October 25th, 2017. And I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Coleman and a second by Mr. Nicely. I think Robert's rules means we're adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.